This program is part of the Devil's Mark Podcast Network, the official podcast network of Shadowpath Diabolism.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast for Friday, September 11th, 2020. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit about shadowpath diabolism, explaining a little bit more about my approach and about why I'm trying to do all this.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast, the official podcast of Shadowpath Diabolism, your daily dose of Diabolonian philosophy to inspire you on your journey down the crooked shadow path. Here's your host, R.J. Womack, Brother Nero.
The first thing I want to say to you is that we are not talking about neo-paganism. When we talk about paganism, we're talking about ancient paganism, pre-Christian paganism. And we've always believed that Satanism is a form of paganism. This is not a recent development. It is not intended to sell books. It is something that I've always believed, and it is something that I've preached on my podcast for years. It's just because there are people who don't listen to my podcast and write comments like they actually do listen. And so just to clarify this, right? The reason we're trying to go back to ancient pagan practices as a way of worshiping the demons is because the ancient pagan practices predate Western occultism, they predate Christianity, and that's why we use the ancient Norse traditions, we use the ancient Greek traditions, the ancient Roman traditions, and we look at other sources that even predate those traditions or those civilizations because we're trying to get back to a pre-Christian mindset. We believe that Satan is a god of wisdom, a god of knowledge, a god of nature, a god of balance. Now, is he the Christian devil? Do you want to look at him that way? Well, if he is the Christian devil, he's not the way that they define him. So if he was an ancient god, which we believe he is, right? Who was he? We regard him as Pan, Carnunus, many different names. So to us, the way to worship him is to be in balance with nature. We don't look at things and try to categorize everything. So of course it's okay to worship goddesses. Okay, it's perfectly fine to worship other demonic gods and goddesses. And if Satan has a problem with a god or goddess you worship, he will let you know. You will feel it and you will know that this is not a good thing. You don't need me to tell you. You don't need some guy on the internet to tell you. Follow your intuition. Get back to your heart. Why do you think the logo for this podcast is a black obsidian heart? And it says, "Forsake me not." Because the whole idea is this occult movement that we have right now, this secular, humanistic, New Age philosophy is designed to pull people away from the demonic gods, to pull people away from the spiritual. And that's why that heart is to remind you, forsake me not. When everybody else is turning against me, when everybody else is forgetting my name, forsake me not. And that is not just a random statement that I came up with, by the way. That comes from a text that I consider to be sacred. And he reminds us there will come a time when people will say I'm an archetype, when people will say I don't exist. And your job as my children is to forsake me not. I don't know how much more to make this clear to you. This podcast is not about selling books. It's not about trying to promote some sex cult. It is about trying to rebuild a true tradition of devil worship, a true tradition of service to the gods, a true tradition of service to the people and to the people who worship Satan. It is meant to be a serious religious faith. This is not a game. It's not a joke. It's not me trying to get attention. My life would be much easier if I just stopped doing this podcast. If I stopped doing this podcast, my life would be more peaceful. If I stopped doing this podcast, I'd have more money. I use every bit of spare money I have to do this. Why? Because I believe in it. Why? Because I had an experience with Satan that convinced me he existed. Why? Why do I do this? Because I promised Satan I would do this when I was 12 years old. That's why. I don't know how else to make it any clearer to you guys. If you want somebody who actually believes in Satan, who actually practices this religion, who actually wants to help people get closer to Satan, who wants to build a tradition that brings back a traditional priesthood, this is where you need to be. If you're serious about your devotion to the demonic gods, to the demons, to the gods and goddesses, this is where you need to be.
If you would like to learn more about the shadowpath diabolism tradition of occultism, go to rjwomack.com. That's rjwomack.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and support our message, tell a friend, leave us a review, and follow us on social media.